Hey, thanks, Ben. Hey, everybody. My name is Matt. I'm an alcoholic, and I'm really thankful to be here with you. And thank you for the opportunity to share. And Scott, thanks for the nudge. I'm truly grateful to to have you in my life and to have a lot of other amazing guys. Some of which are on this call and gals, and to be one of many. And my sobriety date's May 1st of 2008. I have a home group, Wake Up group here in Nashville, Tennessee. We meet Monday, Tuesday, Saturday mornings at 7 a.m. We'd love to have you come. And I have the privilege of sponsoring other guys and have a great sponsor myself. And all three of those things, my sobriety date, my sponsor, and as a sponsor, more or less, I could change at any time. And I would definitely encourage a new guy out there, a new gal, to get one and stick with it. One of the things that has been important to me is to have a sponsor along this journey, and can express, with words, the relationship that I have today with mine, and that I have with some of the guys that I get to pass along what was so freely given to me. I am, I'm really humbled, always humbled to be able to share my story, and that's what I'm going to do today with God's help. And it's like there's no place I'd rather be right now. But you had told me 15 years ago that on a Saturday night I'd be in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'd laugh at you and tell you there's no way. But you guys are funny, you'd show up in these places I couldn't get out of, and just by there, you said a lot. And but why in the world would I need to be in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous or be so excited to be in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous on a Saturday night? And, it's because alcohol was my solution for a long time, and from as early as I can remember, I didn't feel like I was a part of this world. It's almost like everybody else is speaking a different language, and the instruction manuals I got were in Dutch, and I just wasn't really able to make much sense of it. And I learned really early, from a very young age, to just kind of go with it, and this like fake it till you make it type of thing. And when I was young, acting out in a restaurant as a kid, my dad used to say, "Act like you've been here before." And I hadn't been here before. I hadn't been to that restaurant before. I hadn't been out to eat. But I started to learn at a very young age how to act like I'd been there before. But inside, if you could have seen inside my head, it was, I was terrified. I looked like everybody else in my class, and my peers, we all looked the same. I mean, I had gift with, athletic ability, young age, but inside, I mean, there was something missing. And I like what Carl Jung says in his analysis of alcoholism, and he talks about it as like a spiritual thirst. And I didn't realize it at the time, but I was spiritual thirsty from birth, and I found that solution in a bottle of vodka. When my buddy, my best friend, growing up, we found his mom's bottle above her washer and dryer machine one summer night as I was going into sixth grade. I was 12 years old, and I remember it like, this was last year, very vividly. And we found the bottle, which makes me think that we'd been looking for it for a while. And so this night, we took our bottles of water, poured them out, poured vodka in there, and a splash of orange juice, and ran off into the woods and cracked that thing back open and started chugging it. And that first instant, I felt the burn in the throat, and I thought that we got the wrong stuff, and I was very terrified because I thought my throat was about to close. But then, second later, next thing that happened was the magic that I'd been looking for. Didn't know I was even looking for it, but it was there, and all of a sudden I was at one. All that fear and all the anxiety and that inter noise that I was carrying around for those first 12 years of my life was gone, and I was laying there in the woods. This is in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I was a free man. And I could take you back to that tree today where that happened. It was a profound experience if they didn't chop it down by now. And I my buddy, who I still keep in touch with, I don't know if he had the same experience that I did. He didn't drink all of his, so I helped him out. I thought it was a nice thing to do. We didn't want to waste, our bounty. And I didn't feel great the next morning, but I couldn't wait to do it again. And from the age of 12 for the next decade plus, I would try to recreate that feeling in the woods. And the price that I'd have to pay for that feeling would continue to get, would continue to get higher and higher. And ultimately, I would disown, everything that I loved, every value that I had been raised with, and just, give it all away so that I could feel the way, feel nothing. And at 12, my resources were pretty slim. We couldn't pinch too much off of this fifth or half gallon, whatever it was, above her washer and dryer machine. We needed to get creative, so we found, some other things, and we raided my parents' stash, and we did what we did. But I couldn't wait to do it again. And I did pretty well at not getting in trouble. Consequences were very minimal until I started driving, and I found that I did like to drive once I started to drink. Again, it was not something I'm proud to admit, but I didn't at the time. It just seemed like I needed to get somewhere, and so I'd had a couple drinks, and at the same time, I'm doing well on the outside to manage things. I was still going to school most of the time, and I was in on my way to play collegiate sports and potentially professional sports. But my drinking and the lifestyle that surrounded that was starting to get in the way of some of those disciplines. And my parents being, caring, they helped me get my first car, and I took that car and had a really, really bad accident. Thankfully, nobody was hurt, but, it didn't stop. I couldn't see the fact that I crossed over a line somewhere in 16, 17 years old where I lost the choice in drink. Didn't know that at the time. I didn't know what alcoholism was. After that car accident, I took my parents' car out one night. A couple months later, my car wasn't, it wasn't drivable, and went out to the bar with some friends, some older guys. They got me into this private bar, and this was my first time drinking in public. 17 years old, so I get the nice shirt on. I'm ready to go, man. This is a big time, this is like a big event for me. And I was like, I went out and I already knew what I was going to order. I had everything planned. You know how we do. Like I had everything. I was going to say this, they were going to say this, and I had my drinks ready to go. And Makers and Ginger was what I was going for. And by the second one, I was plugged in, and I went over to talk to these older gals, 23 years old, I believe at the time, very very mature, and I went and we started laughing, and I don't know if they were laughing at me or with me, but it didn't really matter because I was in. I was where I wanted to be the whole time. Like I was a part of it, and I took them and my buddies back to their place. We hung out there, and then early in the morning we had to keep the party going, so we drove across town, and that was my first encounter with the flashlight in the side mirror. Usually it's not a good thing, and it was police. They came up to my window and asked me to pull over. I didn't do that right, apparently, and that the end of the story. I spent my first night in jail, and I do what I do when I get into trouble. I call home, because that's what I either run or I call my lifeline. And my dad picked up the phone and said, "I'm sleeping. I'll think about it in the morning." Click. Well, I'm 17 now at the time, and I learned really quickly that I did not like the amenities offered in this county jail facility. They were not on the same level of what I was living, on the outside. And I I got charged with a DUI, and I got picked up a day or two later, went home, and my mindset was, I have to find somebody to drive me around. That was it. I mean, right on. I mean, that's obviously the problem, right? I don't have a car anymore, and I don't have a driver's license, so I need to find transportation. And as a result of that altercation, I had to go get a thing called an assessment. And basically what that is there's a guy, government employee, I presume maybe, and he asks you a series of questions. It's a standardized test for, my lifestyle. So I was a pretty smart kid, I thought, and I was going to ace this test, and I failed it or passed, depending on which side team you're on. And they told me that I had to go to the A&A. And I said, the A&A, really? Okay, let's get that checked, off the list. And I had no idea what AA was. Thought that it, really it was for people like alcoholics who like my grandfather was very violent, when he drank, and did horrible things to the kids and his wife, that I thankfully didn't have to experience or endure growing up, but I know a lot of us do. And that's what an alcoholic is, that me, I drink so I don't go violent. I get violent when I'm not drinking, when I'm in between drinks. That's when I get crazy. So I need it to just, but whatever. I'll do what I have to do to get what I need to get you off my back and to get on, down the road, because it's all about me, and I'm going to play the game. So I'm a good game player. Like I told you from the beginning, I have these skills to tell me to do what I need to do to get by and act like, you think I need to act. And I went to AA, and it was in a church basement in Raleigh, and opened the door, and all of a sudden, all I see is smoke, and it starts to come out of the room, and I'm like, gosh, they're really smoking like chimneys in here, and I walk in, and there's people in there. I can't see them quite yet, but I walk in, and there's a hallway, and I keep walking, and as I get in there, I see wow, these are these are some people in here. They're freaking old, and I mean, not just old, but I mean grandpa, grandma, Tales from the Crypt. They've been around, and I'm so thankful that you guys are in here and not driving around. I'm they were so sweet though, just like most grandparents are, and they're just made me feel welcome, but I'm just can't wait to get out of here. I'm so uncomfortable, and I, smoke a cigarette with them, hang out and stuff, and probably had a cookie, but, the last thing they said was, just keep coming back. And I said, yeah, we'll see in about 50 years. You guys just stay off the road, and, I'm going to be on my way. This is just a box I had to check to keep on doing what I wanted to do. And God bless, I mean, they probably were 30, 40, 50 years old, I mean, for all I know, but in my mind, that's what I saw. And so I said, thanks for the information. And I went on and found ways to navigate the system, and at 17 years old, and back in, this was in the late 90s, the courts weren't as harsh as I think they have become. And so it was, my parents paid some money, and I checked the boxes, and it wasn't anything too serious. I turned 18, and all of that stuff was gone, and I thought it was a new life, turned a new page. Well, I got into some more trouble, and eventually the judge tells me, that he gets sick of looking at me when I come in there. He tells me one of my options is to go to move. My dad had taken a new job in the mountains, and my mom, I have a sister, she was still in Raleigh. They were finishing up school for her, and I was in and out of school. I was a mess. My life was starting to really unravel at this point in time, and so I said, sure, I'm going to change location. Great plan. And my experience with that is I found me where I went, and I found exactly what I was looking for, and even better quality stuff, to be honest with you. Instead of drinking, whiskey, now I'm drinking moonshine, and the real stuff that out of mason jars that you get on the trailer. Anyways, I found me, and I continued on, and I started to work, and I started to make money, and I'm like, hey, look, guys, on the outside, I'm doing it. And that's okay. but in the inside, I'm starting to feel myself die, and I'm starting to realize that I'm having to put more and more poisons in my body to just be okay, to just continue on. And it's a very progressive thing. But my 19 now, I'm 19, and I still haven't finished high school. I'm making money, because who needs to go to school when you're making money? And I have things, I have renting houses, and, I'm traveling on the weekends. I'm going and we're snowboarding, and in the sun, in the winter, and in the spring months, we do this like longboarding. It's like a snowboard on wheels. And in the mountains, there's some really nice hills. You can get some good runs in, and that's what I do. We have fun doing that. One night, nothing really different than any other night. I had one, maybe two. Was feeling good, and 1:00 in the morning, I'm going down this hill, and it's a new road, a new hill that I'm going down, and I tried to stop at the very end of the hill and do a power slide, and I don't remember what happened, but what I was told is that I had hit my head to concrete going about 10 miles an hour downhill. It was pronounced dead on arrival. Thankfully, I had a roommate that was there, saw the whole thing from afar, got there, was able to call for help, and they brought me to the hospital, and had to call my parents 3:00 that morning and tell them that they didn't know what was going to happen, that this head trauma like this, they had to take a piece of my skull out to let the brain swell, so there wasn't, I didn't have an aneurysm, and they didn't know what was going to happen. They induced me into a coma and just said, we have 72 hours, and there's just, there's no telling. Can't imagine what that would have been like for them, but they stayed there. They prayed. They did what they did, knew how to do, and by the grace of God, something defined medical science that, the brain went back to normal. Well, I don't know if it was ever normal, to be honest, but you know what I mean, like center, and they started the process of rehab, and I go to maybe 3 months or so. I'm in the hospital, and I go from the ICU to step down, and then a recovery hospital, and after 3 months, I still have half of a head. They had to go back later to get that put back on, and I get picked up by my buddy, my roommate, and he passed me one of those medicinal cigarettes that weren't quite legal in that state yet, in a flask, and I just went right back to it and didn't have defense over that first drink. It just seemed like the right thing to do. And now I have a whole bunch of other, cocktails of pain medicine, naturally, like rightfully so. I needed it, but I'm finding that I can take that and I don't have to drink as much. So suffice to say that the next several years I entered into some of the darkest years of my life, and I won't go into great detail about that, but it definitely was like throwing an accelerant on a forest fire. And I began to do things that I'd say I never did do. I would do things I never did say I'd do, and would just throw every moral, every value that I was taught. I mean, I had a great family. They told me right from wrong. I knew right from wrong inside. I had it inside me. I wasn't, like 100% sociopathic or, crazy like that. I mean, I had feelings, but all of that was gone, and I was just living for today, living for literally this drunk, and was hoping that I wouldn't wake up the next day. And that continued for several years. One of the main reasons I tell the story about the traumatic brain injury is because to this very day, I haven't once thought about stepping on a skateboard again. Like, it just hasn't been, a thing. I'm what they would call a problem skateboarder, in our literature. With evidence, I can stop without a question, with no further experimentation necessary. I mean, I was a pretty good skateboarder. I know I could probably justify, but I just I don't have the desire. But with alcohol, you know, the real alcoholic says, you know, even with good reasons, I don't have the ability not to take the first drink. And I missed this a lot, like several times, you know, and from the time of this past accident, or that, you know, when I was 19 until I finally surrendered, you know, like I said, you guys would find me in places that I was checked into, or voluntarily or involuntarily, you know, local hospitals, detox, jails, treatment centers. You know, people in AA would just show up, and I'm like, why are you guys coming here? But I would always go, and I'd listen, and I'd find your stories interesting, but certainly, you know, I was different. I had always had some type of circumstance that couldn't just see the similarities. I'd always have to look for differences in the way that you looked and the way that you talked, and you're, you know, this or that, and it's like, it kept me sick. And I'd go into these rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, and everybody would be laughing and excited and, you know, trying to bring me in, but I'm like, you know, I don't get it. I'm not having fun. I'm dying, actually, because I'm not doing what the people in AA are doing. I'm missing out. It's like, you know, I'm right on the edge, and I could barely. I remember like several times trying to actually go to meetings, and just on meetings, and I'd get a sponsor. But actually, truly, what I would get is a telephone number, and like we like to say, there's a big difference between a sponsor and a telephone number. And I didn't know that at the time. I thought I was just checking the box and I was getting a sponsor, but I've come to find out that it really does help to pick up the phone and call that person. And you know, so I'm dying, and for like the last year of my drinking, I thought you know, really I just needed to find, you know, I needed to get into a relationship. I really wasn't looking for a relationship, but I said maybe this will work. So you know, it was a good idea. Didn't run that one by my sponsor, or that telephone number. But this girl, you know, she just got out of prison, and I really felt that, you know, I could connect with her, I could trust her. We were on the same level, you know. We were definitely living in the dark side, I guess you could say. It was the way I was there. I was living in Gotham City, and I felt like I could really trust this girl, and we kicked it off, and we had a blast. And, you know, I went and you know, started doing some things. I stole from my parents, and these are people who, you know, if I would ask for something, they would you know, give it to me, and they did, until they didn't. And then again, you know, I took it upon myself to take some things that weren't mine from them, and something inside of me broke when I did that. Like, I was on a mission. There was a train going downhill, but there was an ethic inside of me, because family is like next to God, like that's the top, and the way I grew up. And so it's like, once I started taking from them, you know, everybody else was fair game. And so, I mean, I'm not going to get into specifics. Suffice to say that, you know, I started making some decisions that weren't in my best interest, and within very, you know, short succession, you know, I get paid on a Monday, and we go out to a Mexican restaurant, and this is about 50 days in between drinks, and I had a Corona because I was parched. You know, I wasn't really trying to get drunk. I just needed to, and it's just a beer, you know, it's not a big deal. And then another Corona, and then I think there was some tequila involved, and then I started on a spree, which ended 2 weeks later in my parents' neighborhood. I went home to say goodbye to my mom, my dog, because I'd done enough stuff. I knew that I was going to go away for a long time. And I was really hoping that somebody would just, you know, take me out, to be honest with you. And I was going to go home, and we went in. I punched in the gate number, and my mom picked up the phone and said, hey, you know, she hadn't talked to me in who knows how long. Opened the gate, came in, and in their neighborhood, there waits a undercover detective looking for me, and I tried to talk my way out of it, but there was no room for talking. I got put in the back of that car pretty quickly. As I'm in the back of that car, I look back and there's a dog in my car, and it wasn't my car. It wasn't my dog. And there's a row of officers down the road, and my mom eventually comes up the road, this mountain road, because she wonders where I was. She let me in 15, 20 minutes ago. And I see her talk with one of these officers and then drive by the car that I'm in with the look of a mother standing over her son's casket. That's the only way that I could put it. And unfortunately, having had the experience of seeing that, it's very sad. And something inside of me broke and cried out. I didn't think I had it. I thought it was callous to all of the feelings of life and of love, but I cried out to a God I'm sure wasn't too happy with my conduct, and I just said, I can't live like this anymore. Please help me. I'm willing to do whatever it takes. And in that moment, I don't know if I cried that out loud audibly or not, but immediately following that prayer, the people in AA came to mind. Now that my prayers are not answered like that. I don't even know the last time my prayer was answered like that, to be honest with you. I wish a lot of them were, but this one was just direct. And I said, all right, that's what it's going to be. And I would love to tell you that, they let me out on bail that day, and I got to be my home group member ever since, and I made coffee for no, that didn't happen. Because just like we learn, through the process of taking the steps, I'm responsible for my actions. And today, thanks to Alcoholics Anonymous, I can stand, 10 toes, in the face of what has happened, anything past, any mistakes that I make in the present and moving forward. And that's what I learned to do in my early recovery. And I was taken to a federal detention facility where I faced 929 months. And that's what early sobriety looked like for me. And it was an interesting roller coaster. But what I found is that by no virtue of my own, the decisions I made stripped me of everything material, everything that I held on to, all of those things that inside of me that I could put in front of you and tell you that, look, I'm doing okay. But then I had nothing. And I was standing there wearing the same outfit as everybody else in this place, living in a cage, for a better word, like an animal. And that was my world. Everything I had, truly, everything I was in this little 10 by 12 concrete box. And I was locked up for 23 hours and 50 minutes a day. And we got out every few days for a shower, but, there was a 10-minute time where you could make a phone call, controlled movement, one person at a time, go down to the phone. And I got there, and I was on the phone. I had nobody to call. I mean, that's just where I was. That's what the decisions I made. And alcoholism, decisions, lifestyle they're around, I pushed everybody, and I finally had some clarity, like this is it. And I'm here today, and I get to suit up and show up for life today because a man came to a jail and was a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And he came with a book, and probably about a month after, the lockup, I was able to go to a meeting, and I don't remember a word this man said, to be honest with you, all right? I remember one thing. He showed up when he said he was going to show up, and at the end of the meetings, he left and got on the elevator and went home with his dog and his family, and I went back to my world. And if that's not attraction, I don't know what is, and so I tell you that because I don't know if any of you are involved with corrections. Most likely, I'm sure treatment or corrections. There's at least one of you out there that is. I know Scott too. It's not so much what you say when you go into these places, but it's being there. And you bring the book. This guy was sharing his experience, strength, and hope. What a beautiful thing. So I knew that regardless of what was going to happen, that I was going to need Alcoholics Anonymous, more than anything. My life was on the line in more ways than one. So my parents, for whatever reason, they decided they didn't rot away in prison. So they found money that I don't think they had, and got a lawyer for me. And that lawyer said at the very best, we're looking at a 7 to 13. And I made peace with that. But again, this was outcomes. This is not in my hands. So I would just, I would pray. I would try to trust that, I really don't have any control over this. This is truly out of my hands. And I can beat my head on the wall, seeing a lot of people do it. They didn't get out any sooner. And I just, really tried to be in the present. And thankfully, there's a lot of grace, and I ended up just having to do under 2 years, North Carolina Department of Corrections. And I couldn't have asked for a better place to land. And I don't suggest anybody going to prison. It's not a very fun place, safe or attractive. But if you ever do find yourself in prison, it's a great place to get sober. And that's been my experience. And that's because men and women just like you who commit to an hour or 2 hours, 3 hours a week, and come in and you carry the message of Alcoholics Anonymous. You bring a light into a very dark and cold place. At the same time I was in jail, even before getting my time, my dad was diagnosed with a very rare form, aggressive form of cancer that gave him 18 months to live. So there's that too going on in the background. But I knew that there's no family, there's no hope of anything, without getting sober. So I was determined. Fear sobered me for a bit, Bill said, and I was afraid of more than one thing. I'm looking at around me, and there's some just horrible things going on. I'm not going to get into the details. But I after processing and at 23 years old now, I'm 23, and I'm in prison with guys that are never going home. And I was rightfully, afraid, but thankfully never put in a position where I needed to defend myself in the type of way that would result with anything undesired. And the way that I did that was by practicing these principles. And the way I did that was by finding a sponsor. And I'll tell you this is something it's come to me. I know we tell people, sponsor, find a home group. Those are directions that I've been given and I share. But my experience is that I'm a poor finder of sponsors. My first sponsor ended up trying to extort me for money and somehow make me pay him for stuff. So we didn't last too long. But what happened was after going to this facility, they told me I needed to get a job or I needed to go to school or take a class. And I ended up taking this horticulture class because I knew something about growing stuff back in a previous life, and I thought I'll be good at this, and I can grow some food and eat it, and I'll be, I'm starting to get an appetite now. I'm ready to go. And my first sponsor, Terry, was in that class as well, and I saw him. He was a free man walking inside. He had something about him, that was very attractive. And so I ultimately asked him to sponsor me, and he didn't charge me or anything, so I was like, this is a good deal. And I, but, around 6 months, I'm on fire, that fire that we get, it's like, yeah, I can't wait, let me get some more. And we're sitting out on the yard. That's where we did our step study each week. And I was like, Terry, man, you know what, just let me get you a cold drink or something, man. Like, you mean the world. I mean, truly, like, this man, I feel like he saved my life. Like, he lit the torch, and he's like, man, you know what? You don't owe me anything. All you have to do is pass this on to somebody else, and that terrified me as well. But I was like, all right, Terry, you got it, man. And he's like, and I'll take a Dr. Pepper. I was like, no problem. I got that too. So, this is like, things started to happen. And what I really wanted, my own big.
Yeah, I get this address in the back of the book, and I write it, and I go to the mailroom, and they sent me a package with some pamphlets and stuff. But more importantly, there was a letter in there, and it was from a member of AA, and she says, Matt, it sounds like you paid a high price for your drinking, but we're sure are glad that you made it to Alcoholics Anonymous. And my name's Gail. I'm an alcoholic, and we hope this finds you well. And wow, my world got a lot bigger that day. And I kept that book, and I still have that book with me. I didn't realize it at the time, but the reason that was made possible was because a home group member put $1 in the basket, and that home group decided to send some money up to GSO, and it's all a part of that 7 tradition of being self-supporting, and GSO was able to pass that on to me. I didn't see that full circle until later, after I got out and was able to get involved in general service at the group level. And what a beautiful thing, because for the first time I felt like I was part of something bigger than just this one facility. And so I continued on, and I went to different facilities, and I had a sponsor the whole time, and the next facility I went to, I started making amends. My list needed to be addressed, and my sponsor at the time, Juan, said, you know what, these people, you need to write letters to. Don't wait till you get out, because you need to do it now. Now means now. I wrote a letter, sent it off, forgot I sent it, got it back. My mom, she was at the top of my list and wasn't going to come visit me, so I couldn't make one in person. And I received a letter from her, and she said that, the only thing that we want from you. I mean, I did everything I could besides physically hurt this woman. And she says, the only thing that we want from you is for you to start loving yourself like we've loved you this whole time. Wow. And I just lost it. And floodgates opened up, and I start just bawling. And that's not a really cool thing to do when you're in prison, but I couldn't help it. I was just overstruck with, emotion, and a few weeks late had passed, and I remember walking out onto the yard, normal day, and I look around, and there's nobody else out on the yard. And that's a very dangerous thing, because if the yard is closed, that means you have a target on your back. So it startled me at first, but then I kept looking, and there weren't any gun towers. There was no Constantine wire. The barbed wire was gone, and I was standing there like by myself. And I felt this warmth that come from the top of my head, from the sun down through to the bottom of my feet, and it felt like a warm bath was poured over me. And I realized that at that moment I was a free man standing inside of a medium security prison. And the freedom that has been given to me as a result of working these steps, to the best of my willingness. And I also realized that I was doing time well before I got there, well before I got to state corrections facility, Department of Corrections. I was in prison. The bondage of self that I was living in was worse in some ways than the prison itself. So I continue on that path, having contacted something there. So I continue on and continue to have sponsors. And in my last facility, I had met a guy. He was an outside guy named Bob, and Bob said he came to prison, so he didn't come to prison. And so I said, well, that's an interesting concept, but hey, if it was working for you, then that's great. And Bob gave me some insight, and we worked the steps, came 1 through 4 or so, 4 or 5, and at the end of the 4th step, this is not something that's in the literature, but he had me write a list of the goals of things that I wanted to do when I got out, because it was coming up. I had a date, and it was coming soon, and I thought it was worth the exercise, so I did it. And I listed, I'd like to go back and get an associate's degree, because I never really made it through a couple weeks of school in the past. I just always found a distraction. And now, after having that horticultural experience in that one class, I found that, maybe I could do some school. And he had some other, I had some other goals, that were on there. I'd like to take a meeting back to prison. Yeah, crazy enough. I already wanted to go back and carry the message like the guys who had brought it to me. And, so I made this list, and Bob said, you know what, you go. And my family had moved from North Carolina to Tennessee. And thankfully, he told me that they had AA in Tennessee too, because I was pretty, you know, I don't know. I mean, this is it though. I saw guys that already like had got out and came back by the time that I, you know, by the time I had left the first time. And they had great plans of, oh, well, I wanted to, you know, see her and eat a big steak and all of that stuff. But my main objective when I got out was to get to a meeting, to get plugged in. And that's what I did. And my dad, you know, he kept his word and was able to be there against doctor's orders to pick me up on that day. And we went, got to get my probation parole transferred to Tennessee, and through a series of other coincidences that only can happen in God's world. I think Tom I might have had something to do with it, but I had a name and a number by the time I got from North Carolina to Tennessee, and that name was Scott, and I got the opportunity to meet him at a clubhouse here in Nashville. And I remember that for the first time, you know, we met and he gave me a hug, and I'm expecting one of those, you know, one of the pat hugs, and he didn't let go, and it startled me for a moment. And I don't know if you ever, it's like, well, wait, what's about to happen here? And then I just melted. And he said, you know, welcome. And he opened his house, he opened his arms, and you know, he really welcomed me into Tennessee, Alcoholics Anonymous, and just a member. And I you know, I had to learn how to communicate, and like, you know, going in and out of meetings during the meeting wasn't something that, you know, that sounds like something we take for granted, but like that's something that wasn't happening where I had gotten sober. So there was some adjustments, but I got plugged in, and one of the things that was suggested that I need to get a service commitment. That's something that Bob from North Carolina and Tom and everybody else that I saw that was really doing something in Alcoholics Anonymous that, you know, was attractive. They were involved. So I went to my home group and asked one of the home group members there, how do I get involved in service? And he started laughing at me, and I don't know what was so funny, but he said, come to the business meeting on Thursday. So I did, and I left the business meeting at GSR. I had no idea what a GSR was, but, you know, I learned quick, and still, you know, was learning even after I transitioned out. But what was really cool about that experience is I was able to go to these assemblies, and, you know, I knew like 2-3 people when I moved to Tennessee from North Carolina. And then by the end of that assembly, I started to have family from Knoxville to Memphis. And then, you know, I was able to get involved in some different committees and get involved in corrections. And you know what, like, even against, you know, my probation officer's hypothesis that I wasn't going to be able to get into any jails or prisons, you know, I was able to, thanks to like Charlie B from Nashville, you know, I was able to speak at Riverbend a couple times during that first couple of years, and then held a weekly commitment at the Sumner County Jail for a couple of years. And what a gift, you know. And it's like, if I just suit up and show up, God that takes care of the rest. That's one of the things Tom used to say, you know, the guards hold the keys, but God opens and closes the gates. And I have to remember that. And that doesn't just, that's not limited to just the correctional facilities. That's everything. I told you that I wanted to go back and get my associates. So I was driving down the street up here in Hendersonville, Gallatin, and I saw a community college. So I said, what the heck? I ran it by, you know, my home group. They're like, yeah, you should go back to school. That's great. That's a great idea. So I signed up for 2 classes thinking that if I was going to fail, then at least it would just be 2. Something fired in me, you know, and I caught fire in a higher education, and would end up going from associates. I got the associates. If you keep showing up long enough and doing the work, they'll give you the degree at the end of the time. It's really fascinating. And I went and transferred from there into a 4-year private school in Nashville for business, which I wanted to study. And then what's even more remarkable is in my last semester, I was kind of on the fence. I didn't know what was going on. I had no idea, to be honest with you, and I was afraid. When I don't know what's going to happen, I fear. I get into fear. And you guys have shown me how to have faith. And I get to have faith by letting go of the outcomes. And I just stay busy doing the work, you know, and I get, you know, I get recommended for this program in France to get my master's. to work on, graduate level research. And it was not even on my radar, guys. Like, this is not even something I even wanted really, until it was presented to me. And then I said, oh, wow, a 3-year relationship I was just in ended weeks before that, or maybe a month before that. I'm still licking my wounds, but hey, this looks like a really cool opportunity. And, but I'm like, wait until they figure out who I am. As soon as they figure out that thing kind of came up, because my record's not pretty. But you guys told me to just do the footwork and let God take care of the rest of the stuff. And so that's what I did. And I went down to the magistrate's office in Atlanta, and I suited up and I showed up, and I got, I ended up getting a student visa, and then I got a passport. I mean, this guy who didn't even think he was going to, be able to leave the state, let alone leave the country. So, within 3 months of this opportunity, I'm in a big plane going across a big lake, to live in a foreign land. And I don't speak French. Let me tell you that. I did a crash course, but I didn't speak. I don't, and I show up, what? Some really good news. There's AA in France. I'm sure we know this now, with the Zoom, but I saw them in the flesh, and they welcomed me in, and I created the fellowship I crave in a foreign land. And that's the freedom that you guys have shown me, is that, we can go anywhere and, do anything. And I'm going to limit myself when I plan. So that's why I've tried to learn to do it in pencil. If I'm going to, if I have to plan, it's better to do it in pencil. Write the inventory in black ink, but do the planning in pencil, because you know what? God has been good. And each time that I feel like I'm at that point of not knowing, I lean into some of these experiences, and there's so many more. I'm close to the top of the hour, and I'm been told that, going over is not the thing. Am I stopping at the top, Ben? Yeah. Because, there is I have a tremendous debt, to Alcoholics Anonymous, because you guys opened up your arms, when I didn't feel like I had anything to offer, and you didn't ask for anything. And I'm truly, truly humbled and grateful to just be one of you guys today, and to be along for the ride. I mean, I can't even put into words, the gifts. And, my dad passed shortly, after I started my first semester, back in 2010 or 2011. And I was able to be present for that and lean on it. And how did I get through it? The new guys calling me with their problems when I'm sleeping in the ER, having to drive all the way uptown to go to class. When I take care of God's kids, God has a way of taking care of me. And thank you for asking me to share, and thank you for being a part of my journey. Thanks.